What is up, betters? It is Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, which you're watching right now. The Rotoworld High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Welcome into the June 27th edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I am your host, Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X, and pleased to welcome back onto the show my co-host for the evening for the next 119 minutes, Mark Garcia. You follow him on the X at HighLowFF. You know him from 1 week season. You know him from Fantasy Points, from Rotoworld, and of course, Player Profiler. Mark, I would say we're talking about this a little bit before the show. It's kind of a lull right now in the fantasy season. Like nobody's at OTAs, nobody's doing mini camps. Training camp doesn't start for a while yet. But a lot of people are really amping up their drafts, and a lot of people are exploring the space. What was the line from that Blue Oyster Cult sketch on SNL, like where Christopher Walken told the guys, explore the space.
Yeah.
You are exploring the best ball space right now. While it's quiet for a lot of people, it is very loud for you right now, which makes you such a great guest co-host tonight. Hello and welcome.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that intro. I'm stoked to be back here jamming with you. And yeah, like you said, like this is it's a lull in content because it's kind of a lull in the league. It's a lull in the information that we're getting. We're not getting like the constant, oh, this player, look, we're not getting the highlight reel catches from OTAs. We're not getting camp stuff we got nothing right now, man. So that's about to all change. So don't get too don't rest on your laurels too much here, because it's coming. Like we got preseason camp 2.5, 3 weeks away. And we're going to just be inundated with too much information that we're going to have to parse through. So I kind of enjoy this time when a lot of people are kind of taking it easy to really attack.
Do you find yourself in a situation where you can capitalize on the lack of information right now in best ball drafts?
Yeah, because what does information or the lack of it mean? It just means that the variance is increased. And so like me being the game theory dude, that plays like right into my strength of how I can, I think Jacob Sanderson calls it thinking about thinking, but it's the same thing. Like think through these various outcomes or the full range of some of these outcomes, as whether it's depth chart battles, whether it's how a new offense or a team with a new offensive coordinator, a new head coach is going to look. And think of through like the entirety of that range of outcomes. I think gives you a little bit more preparation to be able to say like, hey, I don't have to take a stand on ambiguity right now. I can bet on both sides. Like I don't have to say I'm not going to draft Zach Moss because I don't think he's going to. I think it's going to be Chase Brown or the vice versa. Like I don't have to say I'm going to draft Zach Moss everywhere I can and not draft Chase Brown. I can like say, hey, on this roster, I'll take a stab on Zach Moss, and on the next roster, it'll be Zach Brown or Chase Brown a little bit later. So it's good exercise, I think, to think about thinking or explore a full range of outcomes to be able to say like this could happen, but I'm going to set myself to on this roster to be in the best position to win if that does happen. And if it doesn't, then I'll take the other side on the next roster.
And it's all about learning, right? Like, because we're trying to win, but we're also compiling data for next year and the year after that, right? And I think like the more data points we get, the better off we're going to be as far as how good of fantasy players we can be. And we're going to try to make everybody really good fantasy players on the show. Coming up on tonight's show, Mark and I are going to go around the NFL. We'll talk about Odunze, the Raiders quarterback situation, Demario Douglas, and some other Patriots news that's going on. We're going to find out where Mark stands on certain players like Jonathan Brooks, like Cooper Kupp, like Jaylen Tolbert, DeMarcus Robinson, and more. And then in the second hour, we'll get into some hardcore best ball drafting tips. We're going to talk about how to be a better volume drafter. We're going to talk about the differences in drafting early in the season, the middle part of drafting season, and the end of drafting season. And we're going to talk about Mark participating in the Pros versus Joes competition coming up next month, as well as he's one of the pros in that contest as well, where we're giving away 7 FFPC main event entries for 2025. And then the final segment, we're going to find out what he would do as far as if he's faced between a decision between two players like Kyren Williams and Devon Achane, Tyler Lockett, Jamison Williams, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. We're going to find out what he would do in his drafts. That is going to be the show tonight. And I want to start things off tonight, Mark, with with some news. I mean, this is, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. There's no like news right now, but apparently Rome Odunze, the number 9 overall pick in the NFL draft this year, is under consideration to return punts for the Chicago Bears this season. I don't know if there's anything fantasy wise we can glean from that other than Chicago views this guy as a playmaker. They view him as a guy who can be a field flipper. They view him as a guy who could be a game changer, so to speak. Wide receiver 44 right now in the FFPC best ball tournament. 8'11" is where he's going. He is sandwiched between Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. This is going to be a recurring theme on the show tonight, Mark. But when you look at Odunze, how high is your share level on him this year? Because there's a lot of moving pieces going on in Chicago right now.
Yeah, and why is it important that we're talking about who we expect to return punts or return kickoffs in at the end of June?
Right.
If you did not watch the UFL this season, you did not see what kickoffs are going to look like in the NFL. It is far different than what they have looked like in the past. Why that's important is you have a decision to make because players are starting as stagnant. They cannot be moving towards the line of scrimmage at the kickoff. And now you're seeing that move forward some. So there's a decision to make from the kicking team. Do I just kick this out of the back of the end zone and give them the ball now at a further yardage? Or do I give them the chance to rip off a massive return because everybody is stagnant and now closer together? They're not just bulls running at each other. What's the movie with Mark Wahlberg, who from the Philadelphia Eagles? What is that movie? And he earns his way.
It's the Vince Papale story.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what is that
Invincible.
called? Invincible. I was just gonna say Insurmountable. I knew that wasn't it. Invincible. Mark Wahlberg. Yes.
Yeah. It's like he earns his way into playing time on the kickoff team on special teams, and you see him like it has that like 1,000-yard stare or a deer in the headlights look on his first kickoff coverage, and he just gets like blindsided, smacked. We're not going to see that anymore. So it's very interesting. But all that to say, like, it is going to be fantasy relevant who is returning kicks this year in the NFL because we're probably going to see a higher rate of return touchdowns. We're probably going to see that influence like leagues where you have to start a defense or DFS or all these different aspects are going to change a little bit. So as far as Rome Odunze, that's a plus in my mind that this coaching staff views him as a legitimate playmaker. So, and yeah, like the other two primary wide receivers on his team are old. They don't want to throw those guys. They don't want to throw Keenan Allen or DJ Moore like into the fire returning kicks. But it kind of, it speaks to his individual talent level. So to me, like that might be a tiebreaker, might not. I don't like where Rome Odunze is going right now. I think he's probably better served 10th, 11th round alongside guys like who have a more comparable like median projection, like Jacoby Myers, Brandon Cooks. But as far as like this coaching staff obviously is trusting this young talent with returning kicks where we know they are going to be more valuable than in the past. That's a plus. So I don't know if I'm in or out at his current ADP. I don't have a lot currently in the best ball scene. Just because like playing behind the guys that he's playing with a rookie quarterback and the changes they have in Chicago, like his weekly range of outcomes is probably not comparable to the other guys that are around him.
When you look at the Bears offense in general, Mark, there are a lot of players going higher than they were last year for the Bears. You know, you talk about DJ Moore in the 4th round, Keenan Allen in the 6th, Swift is going in the 7th, along with Rome Odunze in the 8th, Caleb Williams in the 10th, Cole Kmet in the 10th. Are there any, when I rattle off those ADPs, do any of those Bears sound like busts to you this year? Because, you know, the offense still has to perform. And that's a lot of players that are being drafted fairly high. And maybe one or more of those guys are not going to live up to those ADPs.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting dynamic because we have to compare them not to like even the other guys that are going in their range, but like the other guys that are available that have similar ranges of outcomes. So like the easy comparison at quarterback with Caleb Williams is Jayden Daniels, maybe even Drake May, much later. So for that discussion of like the rookie quarterback meta of this season, I prefer Jayden Daniels, especially on FFPC. Less so in best ball because touchdowns are so important to scoring at the position. So we don't expect the Commanders to score a ton of real world touchdowns. But like especially in where you're making a roster decision in managed leagues and season long in dynasty, much prefer Jayden Daniels over Caleb Williams. Even Drake May I would prefer per at cost over Caleb Williams. So I'd probably say Caleb, but there is this like other in best ball, there is this other thing that's pulling us the other direction. In this, they have a lot of talent on this offense, and I
Mhm.
want some of it. So I'd say per ADP, I'm probably less into Caleb Williams, less into Cole Kmet, who Cole Kmet, his like ADP last year is very comparable to this year, and they added like all these weapons. So I'm less into Cole Kmet, less into Caleb Williams. I'm fine taking DJ Moore where it makes sense. I'm fine taking Keenan where it makes sense. And Odunze is that like undecided range where it's like I want exposure, and especially being a volume drafter, we know that we can influence exposure levels. We have all this time to play around with that. So I want to keep that somewhere where I still can influence it. So I don't want to have it at 0 where now I'm like, oh crap, I got to catch up like all the way. He's a guy that I want to keep in this like 4 to 5% range where I can influence it higher, I can influence it lower, and I have the time and the number of drafts still to do that.
Let's talk about the KISS method when it comes to the 2024 NFL draft. Caleb Williams goes number 1, Jayden Daniels goes number 2 in the draft.
Mhm.
You can't get closer than that. They're back-to-back picks.
Yeah.
I don't wanna put words in your mouth. It sounds like you're much higher on Daniels than you are on Caleb Williams. What is
I
the reason for that?
In a vacuum, in leagues that you are making these roster decisions, again, this is not best ball centric. It's flip a coin in best ball. Like it could be, we don't know. There's just so many variables. But in a league where you're managing, you're setting these roster decisions, dynasty, season long, all these different formats that we're all playing. We're all playing on FFPC. Jayden Daniels likely has a much more condensed range of outcomes as far as weekly range of outcomes goes. That means his array, his bell curve is going to be much more concentrated about his median, and his median is probably a little bit higher than Caleb Williams,
Mm.
in that we expect him to score 16 to 18 points, fantasy points, more frequently than Caleb Williams. Whereas Caleb Williams might have the more outlier type games, the ceiling type games. He's also going to have the 7-point clunkers who is likely going to be there as well. Jayden Daniels might score 7 points on the ground every week. So that additional floor or that additional rushing upside that boosts his median expectation is more important to us where we have to make these lineup decisions. It feels a little bit more comfy to be able to say like, yeah, he's probably not going to score 28 points this week, but I'll take the 20 and move on.
S
Um,
s so just regarding the Caleb Williams thing, because I happen to agree with you. I think Jayden Daniels does offer the higher, rushing upside. But I look at Caleb Williams, what he did at USC last year. And by the way, I think he's like 25, 30 pounds heavier
yeah.
than Jayden Daniels as well. But you
Yes.
look at what he was able to do, and I'm trying to bring up the stats right now because I know it's here somewhere. When you look at Caleb Williams last year, um, I guess I don't know, maybe it was skewed a little bit because in college they count the quarterback sacks for rushing yardage,
Yeah.
right? So it brings you down a little bit. So technically, he only had 142 rushing yards last year, but he did get in the end zone 11 touchdowns. Do you view the rushing chops for Jayden Daniels? I mean, again, it sounds like you view them quite significantly more than Caleb Williams.
I do. And that's while Caleb Williams is a mobile quote unquote quarterback, he is more of an escapability type quarterback. That's the kind of term I like to think, in that he is capable of extending a play, keep his eyes downfield, read the defensive coverage, and take off if he needs to. Whereas a guy like Jayden Daniels is more akin to a guy like Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson, where he has the upside to see schemed rushing usage or schemed plays designed to get him in the open field with the ball in his hands. So that is very different when you're talking about upside. Whereas Caleb Williams, that is not going to be consistent week to week, or we don't expect it to be. Yes, he might add like a 6-pointer game on the ground, but it's going to be highly variant because those are going to be escapes. Those are likely to be he is escaping pressure on the pocket with his eyes downfield and he is extending the play. And now he sees an opening when the linebackers and he exploits that. Whereas Jayden Daniels might see like 3 to 4 designed carries a game.
Right. And that's the thing, right? As long as he stays healthy, as long as he goes down, as long as he goes out of bounds, that is going to be a huge boon when you compare those two. Again, I agree with you. I happen to like Jayden Daniels in redraft specifically over Caleb Williams this year. Horse a piece of dynasty. Haven't made up my mind on that since they're about even for me and my dynasty shares there. Let's talk about a quarterback who was a rookie last year that is getting a lot of steam this year, and that's Anthony Richardson. Now, Indianapolis has said that he is going to be a full go coming into training camp, despite having this sore shoulder that he was dealing with earlier in this offseason. Chris Ballard, who's the GM of the Colts, said that the team is not concerned about the shoulder. He underwent season-ending shoulder surgery to repair an AC joint sprain last year, basically a month into the 2023 season last year, and he's been working his way back ever since. Now, when he was healthy, not only did he flash how good he is on the ground, but I was really impressed how accurate he was in the air to some of the receivers that he had on the team. This is going to be a run-heavy attack again this year, and I would imagine Richardson, it's a catch-22 because we heard Richardson saying that he's not going to change the way he plays when we as fantasy players would love to see him at least tweak the way he plays where he's not getting all these nasty hits and at least subjecting himself to fewer of those hits. The fact that he's going to be a full go in training camp. And Mark, I don't know the conversation. I know you've done a ton of podcasts, but the conversations I've had with a lot of high stakes players is they view Anthony Richardson as a potential top 3, even maybe top overall scoring quarterback this year if he stays healthy. And when we look at the fantasy mojo on him, fantasymojo.com, Darren Armani, the godfather of the Pros versus Joes contest. Anytime we cite ADP on the show, it's always at fantasymojo.com. Highly recommend you get a subscription there if you do play in the FFPC. When you look at Anthony Richardson right there, he is going as quarterback 5 at the 601 in the FFPC best ball tournament. That seems like a price I still want to be striking at right there. I don't know how you view your Anthony Richardson shares this year, but I feel like this is a guy that, especially if you're a volume drafter, you got to get a significant amount of shares of.
Yeah, so I started off, and again, I was drafting the day after the NFL draft. So we hit the ground running before the NFL season was even released, or this NFL schedule. So I started off this offseason drafting a ton of Anthony Richardson. There are some very interesting talking points when talking about Anthony Richardson. One, we can very easily point to, he led the league at the quarterback position in fantasy points per, we call it game, but for him, it's per 4 quarters because he only played under 9 quarters of football last season. The reason that he did that is he scored 7 touchdowns in that just over 2 games worth of playing on an NFL football field. And the reason why that's important is because, and I did this study prior to last offseason, I wanted to find the correlative function between touchdowns and fantasy expectation at the 4 major positions. And what I found was touchdowns is most correlated to the quarterback position. It matters not like, yes, you get time and a half for a rushing score versus a passing score, but total touchdowns is the most predictive function of fantasy production year over year at the quarterback position. How many touchdowns can they score? So yeah, it makes sense that like Anthony Richardson led the league in fantasy points per 4 quarters because he scored 7 touchdowns. 4 of those were on the ground, 3 of them were in the air. So while Anthony Richardson like has immense upside, we're not necessarily drafting Anthony Richardson because we are predicting him to finish as quarterback 1, because the magic number over the last decade of play in the NFL, the magic number to finish overall quarterback 1 in fantasy football is 40 touchdowns. I highly doubt that Anthony Richardson has 40 touchdowns in his range of outcomes.
That's combined rushing and passing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So you look at the past 2 seasons, it was Josh Allen. He was over 40 touchdowns each year. 15 of them came on the ground last season, which is absurd. Scoring touchdowns. So does he have overall quarterback 1 within his range of outcomes? I would argue it's more likely the answer to that question is no than it is yes. The same argument can be had for Lamar Jackson. He has not scored more than 33 touchdowns since his rookie season. So while it is highly likely that they finish in the top 5, it's highly unlikely that they finish the top overall quarterback. So who are the guys that are in that discussion? It's like it's Josh Allen, it's Jalen Hurts, it's maybe even Dak Prescott. They have 0 backfield in Dallas. We know that Mike McCarthy is a pass-heavy offensive play caller to begin with. He scored 30, I can't remember the exact number, 36, 37 touchdowns last season. And that number might be even higher. So like, I would argue that whole discussion, Dak Prescott probably has a higher percentage chance of finishing quarterback 1 than Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson do. But they have a lower percentage. He has a lower percentage chance to finish in the top 5. But that's within his range of outcomes at a higher rate than those other guys.
And we'll get into this later on in the show, but this is what we're dealing with, right? It's all about probabilities. It's not whether this guy does this or this guy does that. It's what the likelihood of this guy doing this and the range of outcomes. And that's what I think really, that's like best ball 201, right? Like, which we'll get into in the second hour. Let's talk about Ian Thomas here. And I know like, oh, Balky, why are you bringing up Ian Thomas? Nobody cares. Well, in the FFPC, it's tight end premium scoring. And I have seen a lot of people draft Jatavian Sanders, not only in dynasty drafts, Mark, but plenty of best ball drafts later on too. And David Newton, who covers the Panthers for ESPN, said that Ian Thomas is the guy who's stolen the spotlight during OTAs and minicamp this year. When you invest a 4th round pick into Jatavian Sanders, who was like the number 3 or 4 tight end off the board, I can't remember what it was in the NFL draft this year, you probably think that this is a guy that's going to grow with Bryce Young. Well, not so fast, my friend. Now, Newton said in his piece for ESPN.com that new head coach Dave Canales, who was the OC for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, he runs a tight end friendly scheme, which has made Ian Thomas a huge target and a significant frequent target at the position this year. Last year, and I shouldn't even say last year, over the last 4 seasons, the Panthers have been last in the league in tight end targets, and Thomas has not gone for more than 197 yards since he went 36, 333, and 2 touchdowns back in 2018 when he was a rookie. Now, I don't know how much stock we want to put into this right now, but I will tell you this. In the FFPC best ball tournament right now, Ian Thomas is coming in at not even being drafted, and Sanders is coming in as tight end 29 in the 17th round. How much are you flipping this right now in the way you're drafting based on this report? Or is this one of these reports that we kind of just look at it as more fluff, Mark?
Yeah, we have to be very careful with how much stock we're placing into reports that are coming out from beat writers in May and June. They're there, they're watching the practices, but they're also like, these guys cover this team only, and they are trying to create news because we just got done talking about this is a time where we don't have a lot of news coming out. So everything's a headline, whether it's a 5-yard out with 0 pads on that is posted on Twitter. It's like, okay, yeah, like Grandma Jane could have caught that as well. Like that's great, but why are we getting all hyped about this? So that information kind of goes into that bucket for me. The follow on to that is I like to think about these things through the sense of, what do I win if I'm right? So what do I win if I'm right on the comparison between Ian Thomas and whatever the hell his name is, the rookie?
Jatavian Sanders.
Jatavian, yeah. What do I win if I'm right? Probably not a whole lot. So that tight end group on Carolina probably doesn't mean a whole lot to me from the perspective of like, what do I win if I'm right? Are they going to win a week for you in a best ball contest? Probably not. Are they going to be a weekly contributor in a managed league contest? Probably not. So it's like those guys are being drafted in the same vein as like Colby Parkinson is a
Hmm.
good example or a comparison to a name I'm clicking over that entire situation. Colby Parkinson like has the direct path to be a quote unquote every down tight end for a team that is playing heavy rates of 11 personnel. They led the league in 11 personnel last week or last season. And we know that they like to use their tight ends in routes. So like, yeah, we might see Colby Parkinson be the lead tight end with a non-negligible route participation rate on an offense that we expect to be a top 5 offense. That's far different from trying to split the hairs between Jatavian and like a position battle that might not even matter for fantasy
Yeah.
purposes.
And that's a great point too. Like we want to pick at nits, we want to split hairs, but at the same time, we don't want that. We still want to be able to see the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
So this is important, but at the same time, we shouldn't get bogged down in it. I think this is the next topic I want to talk about with the Raiders offense might be in a similar situation. Jeremy Fowler, who covers the NFL for ESPN, said Aiden O'Connell probably has the slight edge over Gardner Minshew for the starting quarterback job. The reason I bring this up is not necessarily for an O'Connell versus Minshew FFPC Superflex Best Ball Tournament conversation. It's a conversation about whether you think one of these guys is better for Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, that situation that's going on there. Is
Yeah.
there a difference for you, Mark? Or is this kind of like, look, I'm drafting my Raiders where I draft my Raiders. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is.
I think for the individual upside of the 3 primary pass catchers on offense, so Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and now Brock Bowers enters the scene. For the individual upside for those guys, I think I would prefer Gardner Minshew under center, who has proven to be able to distribute a football at an NFL level. Aiden O'Connell has kind of like done what he can, but not excelled in anything. He does add a little bit based on his college resume and what we saw his first year in the league. Adds a little bit with his legs, but that is directly taking away from what we want for our pass catchers. So I would prefer that Gardner Minshew is under center for the upside. And again, this is like individual week upside of those 3. We know that Gardner Minshew is more of a statuesque pocket presence type quarterback. We know that he is capable in reading a defense, distributing the football. His first read target rate was okay, was fine. These things that we kind of like look at for a quarterback, processing power, his IQ, like the Wonderlic stuff, all of that, Gardner Minshew has the slight edge over AOC. So as far as like when I'm taking, and Devontae Adams is going to be around 2 pick probably throughout the rest of the draft cycle when we're drafting these. So I would prefer, but again, that's like, we can't control that. So we have to be thinking about the complete range of outcomes of that situation. Like it could be a situation where like AOC starts the season and makes it all of 3 to 4 weeks because he's turning the football over and he's playing for a head coach that is like hard in your face smash mouth type guy and Antonio Pierce. Similar to like a Mike Tomlin, where these guys are you don't want to be turning the football over. These guys are in your face. They want to win every play, and they are extremely good at getting the most out of their players. And we saw it last season with like the Raiders. Like they were in a complete funk over the first half of the season. They make the coaching change, and now you have guys like Max Crosby, who is saying like, I love playing football for this guy. Like he is intense. He's in your face. He wants to maximize what he has on the field. So like, I don't know. And it could be the other way. It could be Gardner Minshew starts and has some issues sustaining drives and putting additional stress on their defense. And we see Antonio Pierce say like, that's enough, man. We got to make a change. No idea. I'm not going to pretend I know what's going to happen. I think if we're talking about individual upside, I think it's greater with Gardner Minshew under center.
And we have to draft these guys understanding it could be both these guys for stretches of the season.
Yeah.
So, but from, if I'm hearing you correctly, we just kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. Maybe we assume that, and we draft these Raiders based on, especially in best ball leagues, based on the fact that they're probably going to be catching passes from both these guys during stretches this year, right?
Yeah, and for that reason, like I prefer Jacoby Myers, who is the cheapest of the three.
Yep.
I prefer Jacoby Myers in a vacuum. I have a lot more than taking a stand on Devontae Adams in the second, or even and the price is okay, to be honest, on Brock Bowers, particularly in tight end premium. I think
Mhm.
there is definite upside there, so I don't mind those two.
Brock Bowers in the FFPC best ball tournament at the moment over the last 5 days is currently going as tight end 11 at the 603 there as well. I want to talk about Antonio Pierce's former team that he played for in the New England. No, he played for the Giants, so that's a
Yeah,
horrible transition. I'm sorry.
that's all
We're
right.
going to
You
talk.
recovered.
We're going to talk about the Patriots. Patriots and Giants just get blurred in my mind because of those Super Bowls they played in. But let's
Yeah,
talk about New England. Chad Graff, who covers the team for The Athletic, said that by far and away the Patriots' best, most explosive playmaker in practice this spring was not Jaylen Polk. It wasn't Javon Baker. It was Demario Pop Douglas. Now, Douglas last year was a sixth-round pick. He ended up playing nearly 70% of all of his snaps from the slot, and he led the team with 561 receiving yards last year. Alex Van Pelt is the new offensive coordinator in New England, and I look at this situation as understanding that it is a new quarterback. It's a new head coach. It's a new OC. A lot of new stuff there, right?
yeah,
Um, but when you look at Douglas, what he did last year, I still feel like he's got a leg up on the rookies in Polk and in Javon Baker. If we look at the FFPC Best Ball Tournament ADP on Demario Douglas right now, he's wide receiver 73 in the 16th round. I don't know how you fall in on this, Mark, but when you have a player that could be a wide receiver one and was the team's wide receiver one last year, and all they did was basically draft guys, they didn't make a big splash in free agency as far as a receiver
yeah.
to catch passes from Drake May. My ears perk up when I hear Demario Douglas and the fact that I didn't get him in the 16th round this year. Your thoughts on him as a late round pick in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament?
Yeah, this is a guy who I was targeting fairly heavily in the 18th round, in early best ball, because it was my assumption that he was going to be the guy that was looking the best on the football field. The two wide receivers that they drafted are, I would classify them in the project bucket.
Yeah.
They have significant upside, but they need some coaching. They need some reps. They need to be in the right system to maximize that upside. These are not guys that are going to enter the league and they're just going to immediately be an alpha type guy, a guy who is going to command a 30% first read target share. No, these are guys who are more in the. And I don't want to make direct comparisons, so I won't even go there. But these are guys that probably need some time at the NFL level. So, what does that mean from a best ball perspective? What does that mean from a managed league perspective? They're okay to take shots on, but we should expect Demario Douglas to have a good chance. And again, speaking probabilistically here, we should expect Pop Douglas to have a good chance to lead the team in receiving. The other side of that is, what do I win if I'm right? What do I win if is Pop Douglas going to be an 85% snap rate wide receiver? Probably not. You know, he's a 5 foot nothing wide receiver, and he is playing on an offense who we don't expect to be throwing the ball a whole heck of a lot. He's playing on a team who we don't expect to be utilizing 11 personnel a whole heck of a lot. So that caps his upside. So is he going to be this, like, it's a similar discussion to Greg Dortch, another like diminutive slot wide receiver on an offense that may or may not outperform their current expectations. But it's like that is valuable in the sense that, like, he's probably going to be a consistent, both of those guys are probably going to be consistent, like 4 to 6 catch players. Throwing a touchdown in a full PPR setting, that's a fairly good week for a guy that's going in the 17th, 18th round. At the same time, are these guys going to have paths to 25 plus fantasy point games? Highly unlikely. So, in a best ball format, as these players are likely to continue to trickle up in ADP, these are guys I'm not chasing as they continue to go up in ADP, because their ceiling, their weekly ceiling, is severely capped based on their size, the position we expect them to play, their role in the offense. These are not guys who are going to go out and earn 12 targets in a
When
weekly setting.
And that's the thing is what I want to focus on here. When you're talking about drafting players, be it any position, running back, receiver, tight end, 15th round and on, Mark, are you looking for a player? Are you drafting mostly players that maybe have that low floor, but that they do have that high ceiling as well?
It depends. That's a cop out answer, but it's so true.
Based on what your team looks like at that point?
Yeah, based on what I've done previously, because I mean, not many people view these decisions individually, and fewer people view them through the lens of what I've done in the past in this particular draft means for the rest of it. And like understanding game theory helps to conceptualize like this idea of expected value. Expected value is what we expect to extract from each entry that we put into a contest based on the rake, based on the contest structure, based on the payouts, based on what roster construction I'm utilizing. The thing about expected value is it assumes an infinite sample size, which we don't. We have a sample size of 1
Right.
for this season, and it eliminates variance. So the reason that we use expected value to kind of judge our performance instead of things like ROI or did I ship a tournament is we have direct control over it. Why that is so interesting and why it's such a difficult nut to crack is the equation for expected value is going to change based on every other pick in a draft, every other, not just yours, but the 11 other people you're drafting against. And it's going to change on positional allocation. What draft capital have I invested to the various positions up to this point? That equation is going to shift with like playoff style format contest, like FFPC utilizes like cumulative scoring in the playoff rounds. It's going to shift, compare that to like Underdog or some of these other best ball sites where, or drafters where it's cumulative scoring. It's going to shift to Underdog where it's like each week in the playoffs is its individual entity. It's going to shift on things like strength of schedule. There's so much that goes into expected value that it's almost impossible to say we know without a shadow of a doubt what the optimal thing is.
Go ahead.
All we can do is train our decision-making process to like process as much of that as possible in the minute and a half we have on the clock in FFPC or in the 30 seconds we have on the clock at another site.
I think that's the thing that always gets me, and this took me a while to understand. Not exactly what you're talking about, but having finite a finite vision for a player, right? Whether I'm drafting in January, whether I'm drafting in May, whether I'm drafting in July, whether I'm drafting in September. Understanding that football is a weird game with a funny shaped ball and weird stuff happens, right?
We call that variance.
It's massive variance. And that was
Yes.
one of the things that, like, the more and more I got into high stakes fantasy football, I was like dialed in, right? And once drafting season would start, I'd be like, okay, I'm pretty dialed in on how I feel about these guys. But one of the things that has been difficult for me to grasp is I shouldn't be dialed in on players. I should be dialed into player variances, right? And expected outcomes and how far that range is, whether it's massive, whether it's small, whether it's, it's stuff like that. So, and I think that's the important thing when and I know there's a lot of volume drafters who watch this show. That's the thing you have to understand when it comes to building your teams. A lot of them are going to be bad. Some are going to be really good, but it's all about trying to find that not happy medium, but trying to find that one team that shoots up above everybody else. And that's what we'll get into lead off the second hour. We are up against it. I want to get one more thing in about the Patriots here, as long as we're talking about New England. Ramondre Stevenson signed a 4-year, $36 million contract extension. He's now under contract with the Patriots through 2028. 14 touchdowns, 2,200 yards in 3 seasons with the team. He's also got well over 120 catches for just under 800 yards and a touchdown. Last season was his worst yards per carry on the ground, yards per touch last year, 4.4 yards. But Matt Jones is gone. I already said Alex Van Pelt is in the new OC there. Antonio Gibson has joined the team as well. But the fact that New England is giving him $17 million in fully guaranteed money, $8 million signing bonus, $12 million worth of incentives. I did not see this coming, and I can't help, Mark, but bump up Ramondre Stevenson in my rankings based on the fact of what New England believes in him alone.
So the way that I view these situations, and we're going to see more player signing extensions. We're going to see like what you see around the industry, or from a lot of people talking on Twitter or X or wherever you're taking your primary intake of fantasy information. You see a lot of like follow the money, or like that guy it got paid a bunch. Let me believe in him more than
Hmm.
the field is. I like to think of it again in the like, what do I win if I'm right? And also, could the rest of the people who are talking about the situation be wrong? Um, and again, this goes into like that discussion of range of outcomes where it's like, yeah, Ramondre got paid. That means the team believes in him. Just saying like follow the money also assumes that the teams will never make a mistake. And we know that these teams front offices make mistakes all the freaking time.
Hmm.
So I'm more inclined with Ramondre Stevenson in particular. I'm more inclined to say the Patriots messed up and signed this guy to a lucrative deal instead of rebuilding their team. They are in full on rebuild. And instead of rebuilding the offensive line or going out and targeting defensive line and their linebacking core in the offseason, because they have great secondary behind them, but they're unable to generate the pressure they need to make those guys behind them shine in the secondary. So if Hyla's sitting there and the GM of the Patriots, I'm saying, Ramondre, dude, it's been great. You're an awesome running back, but I cannot sit here and give you this contract when I have so many more pressing needs. You look at like the franchises that have made successful rebuilds or done that. They have like look at the Lions.
Yeah.
They invested heavily in the front five on both sides of the football. And from then, they were able to build around that. Then they go and draft their wide receiver. Then they bring in their running back. Then they draft another running back. Like, then they get their quarterback. They kind of gave me the blueprint of like how you successfully complete a rebuild now. It starts with your front five on each side of the football. And you can extend that to the front seven on the defensive side, right? Because linebackers in today's NFL game are kind of intertwined into the front four or three, depending on the scheme. So, yeah, like to me, the Patriots are just extending their rebuild by giving
Mm.
Ramondre Stevenson the contract they gave him. What does
Yeah.
that mean for fantasy? I don't
Yeah.
know, dude. But they're to me, they're
Well,
just making
here's
dumb decisions.
okay. So you say, what does it mean for fantasy? I think this is a great point to bring up here. In a vacuum, you're only drafting one best ball team this year. Are you more likely to take Antonio Gibson at the 1308 or Ramondre Stevenson at the 611?
I'm probably more likely to not buy into that backfield.
At all, just staying away.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and the Patriots, yeah, they might outperform the current expectations, like the Mike Clay projections of how many touchdowns they're going to score this season, but by how much matters. Like, sure, if they finish 20th in scoring, they're outperform. Look, I told you they're going to outperform their touchdown expectation.
Hmm.
But what does that matter? Like, yeah, directly comparing like other running backs in the Ramondre Stevenson range. Like, do I want Ramondre Stevenson or do I want Joe Mixon? Give me
Yeah.
Joe Mixon 100 times out of 100. Do I want Ramondre Stevenson or even like a guy like Jonathan Brooks? Like, I'll take the discount on Jonathan Brooks, who has the same role as Ramondre Stevenson on a similar offense, but on a lower ADP. Yeah, he's coming off ACL, and that might not come into play until later on in the season. But like, yeah, if Ramondre Stevenson sees 75% of the offensive snaps and opportunities in New England, which is probably his ceiling with Antonio Gibson there, what does that mean for his weekly range of outcomes? And it probably doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. Like, I personally am drafting Zach Moss at a higher rate than a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. Zach Moss is a guy that has a direct path because of who else is on the roster to a similar role to Ramondre Stevenson on a top five offense.
Which
Um,
and that makes perfect sense, right? Why you be like the thing is like, um, well, I'll tell you this. We don't have this on the rundown. I know we're late for a break. Let me just ask you about the Bengals a little bit
yeah.
because I've been hearing some worries out there among high stakes players about Joe Burrow
Yes.
and how he's falling a little bit right now. They don't have Mixon. It's Chase Brown. It's Zach Moss there. How are you handling that Bengals offense as far as your shares go right now, Mark?
If we look at Joe Burrow's career, we come to the realization that this is the most normal offseason he's ever had. So, like, we know he's suffered through some injuries. But we also have seen what he can do when he's healthy. I mean, this is legitimate top 3 type ceiling at the quarterback position. We know that T. Higgins is going to be in town still, finally signing his franchise tender.
Mhm.
We know that Jamar Chase is a legitimate alpha, that the reports are coming out that he might see more slot usage, which is huge for a guy like Jamar Chase and scheming him touches. Like, they've invested, they lost their right tackle this offseason, but they immediately turned around and flipped him for brought in another free agent. So, like, they're investing where it matters. I am much heavier on the Cincinnati Bengals than I think the field is currently, because I think the upside, what do I win if I'm right on those guys, is massive.
Yeah.
It's top 3 offense. We're not saying like what if Ramondre Stevenson, everything goes right for him? Well, he'll probably beat his ADP. But from like a weekly range of outcomes perspective, what does that mean on an offense that is going to struggle to be outside the bottom 10 in scoring this season? It doesn't mean as much to us. So yeah, I'm investing heavily in the Bengals this year up to this point. I think like they have legitimate path to, they lost their offensive coordinator, but head coach Zach Taylor calls the plays anyway. So I'm buying Bengals for sure.
You're buying Bengals. We'll find out where you stand on certain other players like Jonnu Smith, like Cooper Kupp, like DeMarcus Robinson coming up in the next segment. Mark Garcia at HiLoFF on the X from Fantasy Points 1 week season, player profiler, and of course Rotoworld joining me tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I'm Eric Balkman. We're going to find out where Mark stands on those players, and we'll lead it off with Saquon Barkley when we resume right after this.
Right now is Dynasty, and the place to play is myffpc.com. Go to myffpc, use promo code Kupp. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. Now is the time to get in there and get set up with a startup draft. Now is the time, now that the rookies and everyone are set, because you can go in and you can start the draft, and you draft your Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases, and now that we know where the rookies are and where they're landing, you get going on that. So you want to try and set a startup draft for this week coming up if you're not involved yet. So go get involved. Use the QR code here or use the promo code that's in the link in the description here and get yourself going on Dynasty so you can really enjoy these players and draft the players you believe in. If you like Michael Penix Jr., you got to play Dynasty because you got to wait for him, but the payoff is big. And same with like Pearsall and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all these guys. Get in and do that. And I'll tell you what, the orphan leagues over there that we've been talking about, those all got bought up. They're actually all sold. People from this show I know took over a bunch of them. So right now, startups is the way to go. That's the way to rock and roll. It is startup season. Startup season and rookie draft season. That's what's up. Get set up at myffpc.com. Use promo code Kupp. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more and give you a leg up. No dealing with chasing around your friends and making them pay dues and having your buddy be like, oh, dude, I got to quit the league because I got a dog and I can't pay attention no more and I don't want to do trades. Forget all that. You can play online, MyFFPC, high stakes, low stakes, whatever you want to do with experts. And if somebody leaves the league, it goes in that orphan pool and somebody picks it up. The league has never been disbanded on FFPC.com. That's directly from Eric Balkman over there. Has told me that. So that's what's up. Get set up.
We are talking the FFPC Best Ball Tournament and much more here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. 11 minutes until the top of the hour. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Mark Garcia from 1 week season, Rotoworld, Player Profiler, and Fantasy Points. The FFPC Best Ball Tournament went from a $200,000 grand prize to a $300,000 grand prize this year. That is upping it up to $100,000, or up from $100,000 where it was at last year. And you can register for just a $125 entry fee. Live drafts and slow drafts are going on right now at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. All the data I have been citing as far as ADP goes is for the FFPC Best Ball Tournament tonight. We're going to get into that and so much more here tonight as we move forward with high-low FF on the X, Mark Garcia. Saquon Barkley, if we look at his ADP right now, Mark, he is going – this is a player who, by the way, has been playing on some really bad Giants teams over the course of his career. You can make the case, and I think it's a strong case, that he is playing in the best offense he's known in his NFL career, by far and away the best offensive line he's known in his career. However, there is this thing called the tush push that Philadelphia has as well, which I think any conversation with Saquon Barkley in 2024, we have to talk about that as well. Running back 5 at the 203 right now. He has moved up a little bit over the course of the last month. How have you been handling Saquon Barkley in your best ball drafts?
He's one of those guys, and particularly in this top 3 rounds or so, I like to think about the ADP and compare it to like weekly range of outcomes. Because again, these are all weekly games that we're playing. Even best ball is a weekly game, so I like to think of it more in terms of weekly range of outcomes. And through roster construction, we can backfill things like season-long median and all that stuff. But if we operate under the assumption that any of these guys in the top 3 rounds about can be like the overall top performer at their individual position on any given week, Saquon Barkley is firmly in that discussion. He is a guy that we know to be extremely talented. We know that he has some of the best pass game chops in the league. And yeah, like there's this thing, the tush push, that exists. How can we say with absolute certainty that Jalen Hurts is going to see the same efficiency or take as many brutal beatings, because that is subjecting him to some physicality there? He's running into 350, 375 pound grown ass men time and time again. Now that like Jason Kelce is not there, who, if you have not like watched what goes down when a tush push happens, go like just watch like a highlight reel of tush pushes and see what Jason Kelce was doing. That dude was legitimately sniffing grass, getting so low and taking out the knees of the nose tackle or defensive lineman. He was a big part of the reason why that was so effective. So like, I'm not going to sit here and say like I know for a fact how many times they're going to do the tush push at the goal line. But I think it's within the range of outcomes that Saquon takes some of those opportunities.
Does that make him a value then at the 203?
He's a guy that I'm trying to stay around average. I'm trying to keep 7 to 9% of Saquon, and I can adjust it. I don't see myself adjusting it up or down. He's just a guy that I'm okay picking at ADP, and I'll figure it out. The issue with why I don't see myself going more than that is like the overall meta of drafting with ADP this season. There's guys like Derrick Henry, who I haven't looked at the odds. I mean, it's got to be CMC, who is odds on favorite to lead the league in touchdowns, but Derrick Henry is probably one of the top 3 in odds. I'd have to look that up. That's just off the cuff assertion there. But like Derrick Henry, man, playing in Baltimore, available the end of the 3rd round. Other guys that we talked about, Joe Mixon, like these guys that are on top offenses similar to Saquon. So to split the hairs there and say, like, I know without a shadow of a doubt that Saquon will outperform those guys, I can't sit here and say that. It's well within his range of outcomes to finish the overall RB1. It's also well within his range of outcomes to finish RB 13 to 15.
Right.
So yeah, like he's a guy I want. He's a guy I want in playoff style formats because he does have weekly overall RB1 within his weekly range of outcomes. And that's important in those formats. So he's just a guy that like, I'm okay clicking. I'm not ecstatic. I'm not disappointed. I'll just build teams around him and see what happens. So yeah.
It wasn't too long ago, and I know we're taking a drop off the ADP from talking about Saquon Barkley to Jonnu Smith here, but it wasn't that long ago where Jonnu Smith was being drafted in like the 18th, 19th round of the
Mhm.
best ball tournament. Now, if we look at his ADP over the course of the last 5 days, tight end 24 at the 14-12. And I've heard a lot of pundits in the industry and a lot of FFPC high stakes players singing the praises of Jonnu Smith, talking about what he did last year with a talented quarterback throwing to him. And now he goes to an offense where he should, I don't want to say featured, but should be utilized a lot more. And I think he's got a smart coach and play caller there that's going to get him in the right matchups as well. Jonnu Smith at the 14-12 mark. Where do you stand on him at the moment?
He's an okay pick at where he's been pushed up to. I will say, through my 264 best ball drafts up to this point, I have 48% Jonnu Smith. And that was when he was, an afterthought, undrafted even when these contests started. The reason for that is like the people who are bashing on Jonnu Smith are pointing to Mike Gesicki and what he did in this offense. Well, it's like, yeah, Mike McDaniel inherited Mike Gesicki. He was not a player that he went out and got to scheme in his offense. Jonnu Smith, on the other hand, is a guy that Mike McDaniel went out and got. He is also a guy that recorded the second fastest tight end ball carrier speed since that was being tracked last year on his 60-yard catch and run touchdown in Atlanta. So this is very clearly fits right into like what Mike McDaniel wants. He wants playmakers that he can generate space for and get the ball in their hands. That's the same for Tyreek Hill. It's the same for Jaylen Waddle. It's the same for Achane, Raheem Mostert. Like he is a master at getting these guys the football in space, whether it's on the ground, whether it's through the air. Like that's what he does, and he's throwing some unique looks that we have never seen before. There's one play that I point to in driving this home. You look at last season, he ran Tyreek Hill in motion in like a jet sweep pre-snap motion. He was running in behind the quarterback who is lined up under center in front of the running back, this like jet motion-esque motion pre-snap. And instead of like having him set from that pre-snap motion, then snapping the football, they snap the football once he clears the quarterback. He is in motion lateral to the line of scrimmage, which is allowed in today's game. You cannot be running forward, but you can be running laterally. And then he runs this route around the Z wide receiver who is on the perimeter and loops it like 15 yards downfield because he's fast as hell and comes and catches a football in front of the safeties 15, 18 yards downfield. Like, that's what is that route? Is that a hook? Is that like we don't know how to classify
no
that.
Name. There's no
name for that. So like those are the things that Mike McDaniel is doing. And then you saw Puka Nacua doing that. And then you saw Deebo Samuel doing that. Like all the previous like Kyle Shanahan coaching tree guys are like, oh yeah, that's cool. Bobby Sloak was doing that with Tank Dell.
Yeah. Right.
So like he's reinventing the game. And if I can buy into a player in the 17th, 18th round, even the 14th, like sure, that is part of that and that we know has elite athleticism for where he's playing. And we know his coach went out and got him to introduce some funky stuff like that for like, yeah, I want a piece of that for sure.
And it's the buying price, right? That's another factor into it. It doesn't cost you a ton. I just said 14-12, 15-01. That's where he's going right now. Take a few chances. Take more than a few chances on Jonnu Smith because you never know how it will pay off. Now, anybody who follows you, Mark, on X at HiLoFF knows that you have quite the share of Cooper Kupp this year. When I was talking with our producer Matt Deutsch for our image that we were going to use for the YouTube thumbnail on this, I said Cooper Kupp would be perfect on this. Cooper Kupp is really interesting, and he's getting, quite frankly, over the last week, he's getting more interesting. Cooper Kupp, when Sean McVay has been talking about him, I think I saw Scott Barrett, your colleague over at Fantasy Points, talking about like there has been multiple times where Sean McVay has gone out of his way to talk about nobody knows how bad the injuries that he was dealing with this past season were.
Yeah.
I read the article on ESPN.com today about the training that he did with Puka Nacua that was forcing Nacua and his brother, who was actually training with Nacua and Cooper Kupp, that was, they're throwing up in Cooper Kupp's lawn. And Cooper Kupp, if he had something going on later in the day, he would be there at 5:30 or 4:30 instead of 6:30 in the morning working out with Nacua. Now, I understand these are off-season puff pieces, but Cooper Kupp apparently took like a week off after the Super Bowl, and then he was going hard at it again. This is a player who won the Offensive Player of the Year a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, and a player that hasn't really, gotten to that level again. But we know the chops are there. We know he is not old for a receiver. He's older for a receiver. And he's going to have Nacua opposite him this year, and DeMarcus Robinson, who we'll get into in a little bit as well. I think that when you talk about the most compelling players, the most polarizing players, the players that will define the 2024 fantasy football drafting season, Cooper Kupp has to be on the short list there. Cooper Kupp is wide receiver 19 right now. Kupp is going at the 402 in the FFPC best ball tournament. There is so much to unpack here. I tried to set the table, but Mark, I'm going to leave you to setting the main course on as we dig into Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, so Cooper Kupp is a guy that people have seen play injured over the previous 2 seasons, after he saw 190, whatever it was, targets 2 seasons ago. And it's kind of like, oh, I'm out because this guy's 31. He's past the quote unquote wide receiver age cliff. Well, and he's been injured, and I get it. The other side of that is also true. What do I win if I'm right?
Right.
Look at what he did last year in a season where he started on PUP, didn't play the first 4 games, was playing injured, had a severe hamstring ailment, and then got banged up after his 3rd game, I think, last season. Got banged up again, took a massive hit to the chest. This is a guy that in the 10 games where he played an every down role, again, in a Sean McVay offense, who is a coach where we continue to target because he's both forward leaning as far as how he calls the offense and extremely concentrated. We continue to target Sean McVay players in the 10 games where he played an every down role. And for him, every down is 95% plus. 10 games he played alongside Puka Nacua last year. He finished 8 for 118, 7 for 148 and a touchdown, 2 for 29 on 7 targets the game he got hurt, took that hit to the chest, 3 for 18 that first week back from that chest injury, 6 for 39 and 1, 8 for 115 and 1, 8 for 111 and 1, 6 for 52 on 12 targets, and 4 for 27 and 1. So he was at or over 100 yards or a touchdown 6 out of those 10 healthy games, and he did both in 3 of those 10 for 30% frequency. Compare that to the frequency at which some of the top 6, up until the Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the tier 1 wide receivers. Look at their frequency of going for 100 and a touchdown, between 30-40%. So Kupp is right in there. And he did that while playing hurt and alongside everyone's favorite up and coming wide receiver in Puka Nacua. So I don't understand why that is not a viable weekly range of outcomes. And forget his season long, why that isn't a viable weekly range of outcomes for a 3rd round pick. You can get him anywhere in the 3rd right now. And because you can get him anywhere in the 3rd right now, it's the reason I have 67% of him. And that is not I'm not saying I'm going to end the season. If I stop, I'm probably through a quarter of my drafts. I'll probably hit the 1,000 draft mark this year. So if I stop taking Cooper Kupp, I can get him down to double the field, 18%, or just over double expectation of 8.33%. So but I knew that he's a guy who could jump in ADP if the reports start coming out that, hey, he's healthy. And guess what? Reports started coming out that, hey, he's healthy. So all that kind of came together to me targeting him heavily within this wide receiver heavy meta of ADP this year. And just saying 30% frequency of going over 100 and a score. That's great. That puts him amongst the top 6, the elite tier in the NFL. And he did that while playing injured and starting the season on PUP. What if, is it within the range of outcomes for Cooper Kupp that he is healthy, that he has schemed more short yardage or intermediate targets because Puka Nacua now is the primary first read on targets past 10 yards downfield. Like, yeah, those are important. Those are still upside generating targets. And oh, by the way, like, he saw more red zone targets in the contest that he played with Puka Nacua. So all of that, like the fact that this guy's a dog, the fact that this guy we know is a hard worker, the fact that he is one of the smarter, just fun, like I compare him to what we saw in Larry Fitzgerald in the tail end of his career. Like, he had to use his football smarts to understand how to manipulate safeties playing in the slot at a higher rate, right? He wasn't going to be the X-type wide receiver who was winning high point like a la Mike Williams on the perimeter anymore, because he couldn't do that anymore. And that's okay. Cooper Kupp is a guy who has the smarts, the football IQ, the work ethic to be like a Larry Fitzgerald later on in his career. And in the third round, I'll buy that all day.
Let me ask you this, and this is going to be difficult for you because I know you're going to draft 1,000+ teams this year. But if you were only drafting one in the FFPC best ball tournament, let's do a quick would you rather here. Would you rather draft, and assuming you're going to draft a receiver here at this point, would you rather draft Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel?
On FFPC, correct?
Yes.
I would take Cooper Kupp.
You would take Kupp. Cooper Kupp or Mike Evans?
Cooper Kupp.
Cooper Kupp or Malik Neighbors?
That is probably closer than a lot of people want to give credit for, but because Neighbors is playing for the Giants and Kupp is playing for a top 5 potential offense, give me Kupp as well.
All right, here's another polarizing one. Cooper Kupp or the currently contracted, disputed Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco?
That is also fairly, and again, best ball, it's probably Ayuk.
Okay.
But in managed leagues, give me Kupp all day.
Kupp or Jaylen Waddle?
God damn, dude, you give me the hard ones.
Give me I'm going up. I'm going up. Yeah. Here's the thing. I'm going up in the ADP because I want to find out how strong you feel about Kupp.
It's got to be Waddle there.
So when you're talking about Waddle, I mean, you're talking about almost a full round there from the early 4th to the early 3rd, and that's significant at that point as well. So I think that's where we're at there, because then you get up into the 2nd round with Nico Collins, Devontae Adams, so on and so forth. As long as we're talking about Rams, let's finish off this segment. DeMarcus Robinson is a guy that, quite frankly, Mark, I did not give a whole lot of credence to in my draft so far this year. He's a player that, as I've researched him more, I'm like, man, this is a player that really turned it on at the end of last season. And knowing that Kupp exactly has not been a bastion of health, and knowing that the season continues to get longer each and every year, and Kupp continues to get older each and every year, I understand that maybe DeMarcus Robinson would be counted on as something more than the number 3 receiver for the Rams. Where do you stand on DeMarcus Robinson right now in the FFPC best ball tournament, knowing that he is going as wide receiver 75 at the 16-17 turn?
Yeah, DeMarcus Robinson is a guy that we expect to be on the field for a top expected offense. We just talked about the fact that the Rams led the league in 11 personnel frequency last season. He's a guy who I almost directly compare, not from skill set, not from where he plays on the field, but from potential weekly range of outcomes to Khalif Raymond. In the sense that, like, Khalif Raymond is expected to be the primary wide receiver 3 for a potential top offense, or even wide receiver 2 on a given week. We don't know. I mean, with Josh Reynolds no longer in town, we expect him to be on the field. Similar thing for DeMarcus Robinson, and he didn't serve as the primary wide receiver 3 for the entirety of last season, but when he did, he was seeing fairly consistent route participation rate. I mean, his snap share was only 36% for the full season, but his route participation rate was 36%. So, like, he's in a route when he's on the field. So that is a good thing. He's a guy, particularly in best ball, where I have no issues mixing in. These are 17th, 18th round type picks on like 18 round drafts, like Underdog, like DraftKings, going in your top or your bottom 3 rounds on FFPC, where you have 20 picks. So these are guys that, like, again, we're into like weekly range of outcomes. And these are guys that very clearly have a path to something like a 6 for 90-1 type game. And where they're being drafted, that is extremely valuable.
I think, when it comes to late round picks in the FFPC best ball tournament, Robinson is pretty valuable. Well, I should ask you this. Let's wrap up the segment this way. Which Robinson would you rather have late? DeMarcus Robinson or Wan'Dale Robinson in New York? I know you just kind of did not have a lot of great things to say about the Giants offense, but I have talked to a few high stakes players that are kind of higher on Wan'Dale Robinson. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, look at the state of that team, and everybody's looking to a tight end on the roster for who's going to make up for Darren Waller not being there. My answer is it's probably Wan'Dale Robinson. He is the guy who's going to be the heavier slot snap guy. He is the guy who is able to win against linebackers and safeties, similar to how how we would value a tight end playing out of the slot. And why are tight ends so valuable when they're playing out of the slot? Because it's a mismatch against whoever is going to be covering them on the defensive side. You can't stick a linebacker on them because they're too slow and too short. You can't stick a safety on them because their BMI is not enough to man up with this towering tight end. Wan'Dale can be that guy for the Giants in a different physicality or from a different physical sense. He is a guy who can win in the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage and now create separation against linebackers if they're going to cheat and cover. He is a guy who can win against dime corners. He is a guy who can win against a safety cheating down from cover 3 against him. So like it comes down to like, what do we expect from these players and understanding like the game, where the NFL is at right now in how these coverages are rolled. That is a guy who can be this, I don't want to call him like a queen chess piece, but like this guy who has maybe like a bishop. He can win against multiple different kind of coverage schemes and physicality types that are going to be covering him. He's not quite a queen chess piece. They can't use him because he doesn't have the body type. It's similar to like the Greg Dortches and the Demario Douglases that we talked about earlier. You think of like how Kyler talked about Greg Dortch earlier this offseason. He was like, yo, if this guy were 6'3", he would be a top 5 receiver. Like that's how much praise he has for him because he knows that he's a difficult cover. He knows that he can beat man coverage off the line. He can beat press. He knows that he can find the gaps in cover 3 underneath the safeties. So these guys are valuable. It's just that their upside is probably not comparable to some of these other guys from a weekly range of outcomes perspective. But like in full PPR, your Wan'Dale Robinsons, your Greg Dortches, your Demario Douglases, these diminutive wide receivers that are playing on okay to poor offenses, like they can still be meaningful. They can have the consistent, 4 to 6 reception for 50 yards, add in a touchdown, and that's a usable week in a PPR setting.
I have so many questions to ask about players, and I don't want to ask them because I think the tips that you're going to give on best ball tournament drafting, including, understanding the proper word or the proper meaning of the word optimal, understanding how to expose uncertainty and variance to your own advantage, given the other 11 players that are drafting against you. These are things we need to pick your brain about, Mark Garcia, who is from Fantasy Points, Rotoworld, of course, 1 week season, and Player Profiler. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Trust me, you don't want to miss this next segment exclusively on the Better Sports Network right after this.
With Dynasty is that it's so hard to get a good league going. Like it's very difficult to get all these friends that are going to be paying attention, or they're going to stick with it, and they're not going to say, "Oh, I don't want to play anymore. My team stinks. Find somebody else next year." Like, and then you're collecting dues, and then you're getting in arguments, and you're arguing with people on Twitter about dues. Like we've seen too much of that going on. So it's very difficult. And what happens is you find like 5 or 6 good people that want to play, and then you don't have enough people, and you fill the league with a bunch of weirdos. So what I like doing, honestly, at this stage is if I'm going to play Dynasty, I want to play on a nice, clean, serious, professional site, and I go to FFPC to play, right? FFPC has never had a league full. Eric Balkman over there told me that. He's like, if somebody has to leave a league, we just fill it. So your option is you can go and do a startup, and like Jack said in the chat, you start it, and then you go and you you figure out who you're going to take from the top down. And if you want to do like a long rebuild, or a long-term team, or if you want to try and win right away and get a bunch of vets, you can do that. Or you can adopt an orphan team, and with that you go out and somebody quit, and that's so much fun, because then you take their team and you have all these guys that you like, but then you have all of these guys that they had that you don't like, and that's actually way more fun, because then you can trade all those guys, and it's so much fun to trade. Like when I go to orphan teams, I used to say, oh, I'm not going to take this team because all the players, I don't like them. I only want players I do like. But I've realized that it's actually more fun to take the teams that have a couple guys you really like and a couple guys that everyone else likes that you don't like, and then trade them. Like go and grab an orphan team like Gabe Davis and then trade into some Gabe Davis guy. So go do that now. Use the you can use the QR code here or a link in the description, or go to myffpc.com. Just make sure you use promo code Kupp when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. And that's another thing. When you make a league with your friends, Kupp isn't giving you $25, right? You have to pay the full dues. This time you get a little discount. So yeah, go over there. And also for you maniacs out there, they do have high stakes leagues. So these leagues, if you want, you can go big time. I know some of the redraft leagues. We announced on this channel a redraft league that 10K buy-in. I'm not sure the dynasty ones go that high, but they go into the thousands. So if you want to take this real seriously and get crazy with it, do it. That's the place to do it. myffpc.com, promo code Kupp, baby. Go get set up.
The Fantasy Pros Championship is live once again this year, a $1 million grand prize for the second consecutive season. And here's the great thing. $350 to enter. You can win that $1 million grand prize. But because of the Fantasy Pros Championship weekday giveaway, you can get yourself entered into a drawing for a free Fantasy Pros Championship team this year. Here's how it works. If you draft and register and draft anytime this week before Friday. So any draft going on Monday through Thursday, you can utilize the slow draft format as well. They just have to start by Thursday. You will be entered into a drawing that we're going to have Friday morning, and 3 people are going to be lucky enough to get a Fantasy Pros Championship team that they can utilize and draft this year for free to try to win a $1 million grand prize. So I encourage you to scan the QR code that our producer Matt Deutsch has on the screen right now. Of course, you can also go to myffpc.com and register there. And by the way, yours truly is commissioning a draft at 10 p.m. Eastern time tonight, as well as the midnight draft tonight. So hop in there. That will get you qualified for the drawing, and hopefully you can win a free Fantasy Pros Championship team. Again, $1 million grand prize, just $350 to enter, or free if you're lucky enough to be selected in the weekday giveaway. I'm talking with Mark Garcia from Fantasy Points 1 Week Season, Player Profiler, and Rotoworld tonight. You follow him on the X at HiLoFF. I'm Eric Balkman. Here you are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I want to get into the minutia here a little bit, Mark, as much as we can. I want to ask you so many best ball questions, because I know how many teams you draft, and I think it'll help out our viewers. I won't be able to ask all of them that I want to, so I'll just stop wasting time and give you the first one. You're a volume drafter. What is your approach when you put together a team? There are a lot of different ways to do it. If you're drafting one team, you're trying to draft the best team possible. If you're drafting multiple teams, there's a lot of nuance that goes into it, right?
Yeah. So this is very involved. Probably going to be a very involved answer, because it's, I think, a much more involved question than I think that the general populace is going to be honest about. We know that the math has proven that there are certain roster constructions that give us a slight boost to expected value over some of the other ones. In an 18-round draft, those are 2 quarterbacks or 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 2 or 3 tight ends. Like we talked about earlier, we measure that slight boost in expectation in terms of expected value. And again, that assumes an infinite sample size that also removes variance from that equation. I mean, last season, the marquee contest on Underdog, the BBM, was won by a 3 quarterback, 6 running back, 6 wide receiver, 3 tight end team. which is far from optimal. We throw out this term optimal as truth and gospel, not understanding that it is describing what has happened in the past. And what has happened in the past is all of 4 data points. Like, we've been doing this massive best ball thing for like 4 years in earnest. And yeah, there were contests before that on draft before they got bought by FanDuel and then closed. But like, best ball has been going on in earnest for 4 years. Think about people who are familiar with poker and game theory optimal and GTO and the solvers that arrive at those conclusions. There are billions of hands in that database that they are able to run the mathematic calculations on. We have 4 data points. So like, this idea of optimal, we have to take it with a grain of salt, in that like, we know what has mathematically worked at the highest rate up to this point, but we have to also be like cognizant of the fact that like, that might not be true optimal. Like, we don't know. We're probably not going to know for a lot of years. So when I say all that to get to the point that like, we understand what has worked in the past, and that's meaningful. We also know that like, we don't need true optimal in these contests in order to win them, because we're not playing against computers. We're playing against other human beings, and human beings make mistakes, and we're imperfect, and all those like psychological aspects that it takes into account of being human and playing a game. All that to say, like, we know that given that discussion, we know that there is a direct path to how we want to be viewing these roster constructions, positional allocation, things like playoff schedules. Like, all of that stems from it's reverse engineered. It's backed up from what gives us the highest expected value, what will win us the most money over time. So we know that the biggest contributors to expected value depend on, and they're going to change contest to contest, because they depend on the payouts. What's important to us? Where does all the money come from? On FFPC, it comes from like advancing in the best ball, and then like getting into the cumulative scoring phase. On drafters, it's cumulative scoring for the whole season. On DraftKings, it's it's a playoff style format where you have to advance in your pod in week 15 and then week 16 to get to the finals in week 17, similar to Underdog. So that is going to change the contributors to expected value, and where we derive, like, how do we remain the most profitable that we can be, is going to change from platform to platform. It's going to change from contest to contest, because the payout structure is going to change. So all of that, understanding all that, is going to like add into our decision-making process when we're drafting. But it's important to understand that like, we might not know what true optimal is. And true optimal, talking theoretic terms here, in game theory, we look at all these rounds that we're drafting as a decision node on a game tree. And the game tree is this like branching out thing that represents every combination path that you can take, with each branch, we'll say, each stem of each branch connected to the trunk of that game tree being a decision point, which in fantasy football is a draft, a pick in a draft. So think about, even if we were to say we only can draft 12 people at each draft pick based on ADP, we can only take the 6 players prior to that ADP. We can only take the 6 players after that. We're confined to just 12 people at each decision point. The number of potential outcomes on the game tree in an 18-round draft is the order of magnitude of 12 to the 18th power. That is absurd. So there are so many combinations that we can put into the total overall game tree, and that's the total potential outcomes of drafting this game. Now, we know that one path on that game tree, zigzagging our way through the game tree, one path is going to be true optimal. And that exists in every game that you're going to play. That exists in driving to work based on traffic and stoplights and the amount of traffic that's on the freeway. There is an optimal way to get to work every day. You might not wake up and know what that is, but you have an idea of how you're going to attack that. It's the same thing for drafting a best ball team, in that we know there is an optimal path going to be presented to us at the end of the season. We have no idea where that's going to be, but we have these like guidelines to help us out, to help make these decisions a little bit easier. We're weighing things like like all the variables that go into the EV calculations. We hinted on a lot of them earlier. It's like playoff schedule, strength of schedule, coaching tendencies, positional depth chart battles, positional allocations in the draft. And that's all not even taking into account any of the variance that's associated with a full NFL season. So all of that kind of comes into this sense that like, there probably isn't a right answer, y'all.
Yeah.
Don't know. We just don't know. There isn't a right answer where we can say we know where that optimal path is on the game tree this season.
Knowing that there is so much unknown, and knowing that, and I read, I think it was, I think Fantasy Points or Scott Barrett tweeted it out, your post in your latest Week 17 article preview for Fantasy Points. You talked about this, like we can only control. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Yeah,
we can only control so many factors, but ultimately, this is a weird sport played by a bunch of. It's 22 people on the field, weird shaped ball. This kind of, you can't. There's no way to speak in absolutes about this, right? What we can speak about is that we as humans, human nature, we want to deal in absolutes. We want to deal in certainty. We want to deal in how things should go, right? Oftentimes that is not the case in best ball, in fantasy football. So I think that the thing is not the thing to understand is we shouldn't be pursuing what the perfect lineup should be. We shouldn't be pursuing what the way to win is. We shouldn't be pursuing what is the most obvious best way to do it. We should kind of be on the offensive rather than the defensive, and try to take advantage of the 11 other people that are in our draft, right? Because we, after listening to you, understand uncertainty better than them. We understand, after reading what you have to say, we understand variance better than them. So I think that the thing I want to ask you here is, as far as best ball tournaments go, how do we attack uncertainty and variance to use it to our advantage when other people are cowering in fear or not understanding it properly?
Yeah, and we shouldn't be looking at this as a negative, because like humans have evolved to find comfort in the known. Like it's wired into our DNA. We drive the same way to work every day. We sit on the same spot in the couch. It's our spot. That's dad's spot, right? We sit in the same spot at the dinner table. Like we are creatures of habit. We find comfort in the known, in something that we know has worked in the past. That has kept us, like a go back to like the dawn of human beings. Like that is what kept us on this planet. Like it has kept the species alive. So like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that we need to understand. Like we can only control as much as we can control. And that's why I like to think of these things in, what do I win if I'm right? And if we think of it through that, now we're thinking in terms of, what is the range of outcomes of this player, of this offense, of like fast forward to week 17 of this game environment where all the money is being made. How can we put ourselves in the best position to win the most money when those things go right? And that's what it's about. Like even like playing DFS, which is where my background is based in. We're not saying like my projection unit is way better than your projection unit. We are far beyond the time where having like accurate projections and understanding how offensive coordinator tendencies come into play and looking into the analytics. We're far beyond that being an edge. Like that's table stakes. Everybody's doing that. That's common knowledge in game theory terms. It's a similar thing for best ball. Like we're getting into the realm where people have solvers, people have sims, people are have draft caddies, have these heads up displays when they're drafting to give you suggested picks. Like that is no longer an edge. The edge now is, how do I position myself to be in the best position to win the most money when things go right? So like that's all like theoretical and that's like philosophical, but thinking about how I build a team to be in that position is where the edge is now. So I want to be doing that.
I think that's the way you play it, right? I mean, you have to play it knowing what your opponents are doing, knowing what the competition is doing. You have to find that edge. And I think that's where the edge is at the moment, and probably is going to be the edge going forward, at least for the next several years going forward. Mark, the other thing too that I think is important for us to understand: best ball drafts in the FFPC open in January. They're going to go all the way to early September, all the way to the start of the NFL season. If you're drafting now, even May, June, early July, how does that change when we get to training camp? How does that change when we get to late August, early September? How does your drafting now differ than the way you're going to be drafting a month or even a month and a half from now, excuse me?
Yeah, so the stuff that we can't control changes. And that changes with time and it changes with information. So if you are drafting in January, or if you're drafting after the schedule is released in May, the same way that you'd be drafting in late August and early September, you are making a fundamental mistake in that so much is going to change over that sliding scale in time. And what changes is information, and that changes the amount of variance that's present. And variance, again, is all the stuff we can't control. So the way that I have come to harness that variance in my favor is like looking at the ADP movements of the four major positions. Just lump like all quarterbacks, all running backs, all wide receivers, all tight ends together, just to keep it similar and simple. Historically speaking, over the last 10 years of fantasy football, running back movements in ADP are going to be higher in magnitude than any other position. And that's from like when the contest opened to when they finish. And that starts to make sense because we kind of know what the biggest contributing factor to fantasy production at running back is volume. So knowing that we expect running back ADP movement to have the greatest magnitude over a 5-6 month, or drafting on FFPC best ball, a 9-month sample, we can start to say, I can change the way that I'm drafting based on this sliding scale of time and information and variance. So for me, through my 246 or 64, I can't remember, total drafts that I've completed up to this point, I have like 96, 97%, if I had to venture a guess, of those drafts have been zero running back and hero running back builds. But I'm building those as if the running backs that I'm taking on that roster for that specific decision tree are going to move in ADP under the assumption. And now, instead of saying, look at my zero running back build, it's so dope, but I allocated 7 or 8 positions of my 18 that I have to running back, say like, no, dude, like I can just take 4 or 5 and say like, I'm saying in this roster, those guys are going to produce and those guys are going to move in ADP. Now the rest of my roster is stacked. And if those things happen, again, the stuff that we can't control, if those things happen at running back, now I have potential 2 top 12 backs, and those are the guys I'm counting on at running back. And then the rest of my roster is stacked. Like I'm sinking significant capital into wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, making sure that those spots on my roster are locked down. And now let's just like let the variance happen at running back. I'm not going to pretend I know if Jonathan Brooks's knee is put together right, or if it's not, or if he's going to be explosive, or if he's going to be an 80% snap rate type guy. If that happens, I'm going to have Jonathan Brooks on 5 running back rosters, and he's going to be a primary contributor to those. So like we arrive at that like by thinking, by saying, what do I win if I'm right about this? Instead of sinking the 2 additional spots on a very, very confined roster, finite number of spots that we have to pick. And on FFPC and some of these other platforms, we have 20 rounds. So that gives you a little bit of leeway to be a little bit more lax with this. But on like, I prefer rosters that are tighter, because it forces you to make these compromises or think about step 3 and 4 and 5 into this like theoretical journey that we're on, and make those hard decisions and say, how do I optimize for that? So I like drafting on places where you only get 18 of those decision points.
Right.
It forces you to make those tough decisions. But like, that's kind of how I look at it, is like, the way that you optimize for this game will change based on time, information, and variance.
I think the other thing in going through your X feed too, and seeing your interactions and seeing you speak so eloquently and with conviction about the way that you're drafting this year. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, reached out to you and talked about one of your formats that, and it's the format and the build that you did is irrelevant for the purposes of this question. But he said, or she said, I should say, one or the other. Do you think this is good, the way that you built a team? And you kind of responded to saying, like, whether you think a draft is good or not in June is maybe not the right question that we should be asking.
It's irrelevant.
So that's my question, right?
Yeah.
Why is having a quote unquote good draft irrelevant at this point in drafting season, Mark?
There's just so much variance and so much stuff that we can't control. It's like saying that this was a good draft or this was a shitty draft is thinking that you have more control over this game than you have. It's a false premise, and it's a poor way to look at this because we know that so much of it is out of our control. All we can do is try and position ourselves to like maximize the money intake that we win if we're right.
I think the other thing to keep in mind here is the majority of the best ball conversation we've had tonight is trying to win, a six-figure grand prize or what have you. Where you're going up against all these players. You are going to be competing in the FFPC Pros versus Joes Challenge coming up next month. In that format, yes, it's cool to win the whole thing, but you don't get anything for winning the whole thing. But what you do get, if you win your league, is a free entry into the 2025 FFPC main event. So in other words, Mark, you are not drafting against 83 other players. You are drafting against 11 other players in your league. Yeah. For a best ball format, how do you adjust your strategy from going against drafting against thousands of people to drafting against 11 to try to secure this prize?
Yeah, and that comes down into that discussion of like the inputs or the variables in the expected value equation are going to change based on the format. So players like Jayden Daniels or players like the diminutive slot wide receivers that we've talked about, players that have a more condensed weekly range of outcomes about their median become more important in that because we're not looking to increase variance to beat 600,000 teams. We're looking to manage variance and set ourselves up to beat the other 11 people. Similar discussion to what's more important in playoff style formats of best ball. Is it advancement rate or is it optimizing for the playoffs? The answer is they're all contribute to expected value, just at different rates. So in a confined league, I'm much more drawn to volume at running back as opposed to efficiency. So guys like maybe Kyren Williams over Achane in a confined league where we have a little bit better idea of his expected volume. Guys like Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and Drake May at quarterback gain a little bit more importance to that EV calculation in a confined league because they have a higher median expectation, a weekly expectation. They're not going to lose you a week because they're scoring 7 points most likely, right? Wide receivers will compare guys like let's compare Brandon Ayuk to Devontae Adams. That's an easy one. They're right near each other in ADP right now. Devontae Adams is probably more beneficial to a confined league or where you're beating 11 people in the second round than Brandon Ayuk, where we know who's going to have 4-point games. He's going to have 30-point games. So we're not worried more so about like winning a week against 600 other teams. We're more concerned with like beating this immediate 11 teams. So that's kind of my mindset going into Pros versus Joes. And I got to shout out Darren for giving me the invite this year. This is my first time doing so, competing in that. And I think it's an awesome format, awesome contest. Love it. Check out Fantasy Mojo for sure. Shouts to Darren for sure. But yeah, I'm excited to compete. That's kind of my mindset, I think, going into it.
I think that's the right mindset to have. And a player like you who's played in the FF, a lot of the pros never played in the FFPC before,
Yeah.
but a guy like you has competed there and now gets to go against, these other Joes. You're kind of like a quasi Joe in this format, Mark.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I think that'll be very fun to see how you end up in that. We are way over time once again because the content has been so great tonight. I hope everybody's enjoying it as much as I am. Mark Garcia joining me tonight, High-Low FF on the X. Player Profiler, Fantasy Points, 1 week season, and Rotoworld. Let's talk a little. We got into the minutia here. Let's bring it back and get into the maxima. I don't know what it would be. I'm not familiar with that term, but we'll talk a little bit about when if Mark's on the clock, who he's facing. I'm going to give him certain scenarios that he's facing. We'll find out who he likes better than the other. Mark Garcia from all the places I just said, Roto on the World Player Profiler, Fantasy Points, 1 week season, Rotoworld. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
Is Dynasty. And the place to play is myffpc.com. Go to myffpc, use promo code Kupp. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. Now is the time to get in there and get set up with a startup draft. Now is the time, now that the rookies and everyone are set, because you can go in and you can start the draft and, you draft your Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases. And now that we know where the rookies are and where they're landing, you get going on that. So you want to try and set a startup draft for this week coming up if you're not involved yet. So go get involved. Use the QR code here or use the promo code that's in the link in the description here and get yourself going on Dynasty so you can really enjoy these players and draft the players you believe in. If you like Michael Penix Jr., you got to play Dynasty because you got to wait for him, but the payoff is big. And same with like Pearsall and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all these guys. Get in and do that. And I'll tell you what, the orphan leagues over there that we've been talking about, those all got bought up. They're actually all sold. People from this show I know took over a bunch of them. So right now, startups is the way to go. That's the way to rock and roll. It is startup season. Startup season and rookie draft season. That's what's up. Get set up at myffpc.com. Use promo code Kupp. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more and give you a leg up. No dealing with chasing around your friends and making them pay dues and having your buddy be like, oh, dude, I got to quit the league because I got a dog and I can't pay attention no more and I don't want to do trades. Forget all that. You can play online, MyFFPC, high stakes, low stakes, whatever you want to do with experts. And if somebody leaves the league, it goes in that orphan pool and somebody picks it up. A league has never been disbanded on FFPC.com. That's directly from Eric Balkman over there, has told me that. So that's what's up. Get set up.
We've been talking a lot about the FFPC Best Ball Tournament tonight, and I want to remind you, if you want to participate in it, myffpc.com is where to go, myffpc.com, to register for that $300,000 grand prize, $125 entry fee. The other thing that we have not brought up tonight is we have had slow drafts going on for about the last 3 weeks in the FFPC main event, a contest that will give out a $1 million grand prize and a $6 million prize pool. So if you want to register for that, do so at myffpc.com. While you're there, again, check out the Empire Dynasty Leagues. I didn't talk about those enough tonight. The only Dynasty Leagues out there with a progressive prize pool. In other words, if you want to register for that league, you will win the first place prize pool every single year, but a certain amount of the entry fees are set aside every single year. Half the entry fees are set aside every single year. And once one team wins the first place prize 2 years in a row, they not only get that first place prize pool, they get the entire progressive prize pool that has been building up. And then after that, the league disbands, everybody gets their deposits back, and you are free to go with FFPC with a new FFPC Empire League, something we just introduced this year. And I got to tell you, if you're skittish about joining them, they've been filling fast. Like this is a great dynasty format to join because a lot of people have been joining quickly on this, and you can obviously take advantage of everything we have to offer with the Empire Leagues. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. The FFPC Dynasty Startup Leagues are going strong. Typically, we release the startups on the weekends, so you'll have an opportunity to draft in a $100, $250, $500, $750, goes all the way up to 5,000 leagues. Whether it's the Rotoviz Triflex Superflex leagues, whether it's our standard Superflex leagues, whether it's our classic leagues, like whatever you want to do, you can do that. Those dynasty startups and those Empire dynasty startups usually kick off on Saturday and Sunday mornings. We're also introducing the Rotoviz Triflex leagues in a non-dynasty format. In other words, you can join those things that have the redraft capability to them. So you can play in the Rotoviz Triflex leagues where you're going to get the extra dynasty, the extra flex spot. You're going to get the super flex spot. It encourages you to really build a complete team rather than, just build a team that is going to be, good enough to compete at quarterback, tight end, and maybe one of the running back positions. If you like the deeper leagues, the Rotoviz Triflex Dynasty and Rotoviz Triflex Redraft leagues, myffpc.com is where to go for that. myffpc.com for the Empire and the Dynasty leagues. I just mentioned the main event. I will hammer home, in case you missed it earlier, the Fantasy Pros Championship weekday giveaway is back. We reintroduced it on Tuesday. And what that is if you draft a team via live draft, via a slow draft during the week, Monday through Thursday, you're going to be eligible to be in our drawing for a free Fantasy Pros Championship giveaway. Now, what that means is if you sign up and draft those teams Monday through Thursday, you're entered into a drawing that we're going to hold early Friday morning, and 3 players out of those teams that drafted that week will win a free Fantasy Pros Championship, a $350 value that you can register or that you can utilize to win a $1 million grand prize this year. That's in the Fantasy Pros Championship. The Empire Leagues, the Dynasty Startups, the Fantasy Pros Championship, and the FFPC main event, not to mention what we've been talking a lot about tonight, the FFPC Classic Best Ball Tournament, and as well as the Superflex Best Ball Tournament going on at myffpc.com. Remember, the Classic Best Ball Tournament had a $200,000 grand prize last year. This year, it's a $300,000 grand prize, and it's still a $125 entry. The $35 FFPC Superflex Best Ball League is still $35 to enter. However, you can win $100,000 this year rather than the $50,000, or the $25,000 you could win last year. All those leagues available at myffpc.com. Once again, this is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Mark Garcia at High Low FF on the X machine, and so much great stuff we had in that last segment, Mark. Really appreciated it. I want to do sort of a fantasy face-off, an OTC, if you will, as our good friend JD from the Goat District would say. If you are on the clock and you are only having one league this year, who do you go with? I'm going to throw it with running backs right away. Kyren Williams or Devon Achane in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. As a reminder, if we look at the ADPs on these guys, they're basically back-to-back. 303 for Devon Achane, Kyren Williams at the 304. You can only pick one. Who's it going to be, Mark?
Give me Achane. And sorry for my freaking laptop died, man.
Okay, don't worry about it. All good.
Yeah, give me Achane, man.
Why is it Achane over Kyren Williams, who had a bananas season last year?
I think there's we've seen what Achane is, and there's room for upside as far as touches go. We've also seen what Kyren is, and there's not much room for additional touches from what we saw last season. So, Achane's unlikely to average 8.6 yards per touch again, but he's a guy that in that offense, if he sees 55% of the running back opportunities instead of the 40% he saw last year, there's significant room for upside.
What about a pair of rookie running backs this year? I know a lot of players were facing this decision in rookie dynasty drafts. What about in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament? Would you rather have Green Bay's Marshawn Lloyd? Would you rather have Miami's Jaylen Wright?
I like Marshawn Lloyd because I think he has a more direct path to meaningful playing time and similar contingent upside. We're talking about if like Jaylen Wright were to see his 99% outcome, so like his elite, the best he could do, it would probably require an injury to both Achane and Raheem Mostert. Well, I mean, that's possible. It's just less likely than a guy like Marshawn Lloyd, who I expect to start the season in the change of pace RB2 role in Green Bay and probably has a more direct path to meaningful production.
You may or may not know this. I'm in the throes of Lambeau Field here in Northeast Wisconsin. I cannot agree with you more, for sure on that. I think you are spot on with your Marshawn Lloyd analysis, and I totally agree with you there. Shifting to the wide receivers, a polarizing guy has been Nico Collins so far this year. Where do you stand on Nico Collins versus Jaylen Waddle in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament? Jaylen Waddle at the 305, Nico Collins at the 212. Technically, most people are taking Collins over Waddle, but it is about a half round difference. Which one are you going with here?
I'm going Waddle at a high frequency here.
And why is it? Because Waddle's going behind Collins. Is it because of the unknowns with Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell? I know you were talking about the fact that Jaylen Waddle has struggled against man coverage, but man coverage across the league has gone down every single year for the last half decade. Why is Waddle the unequivocal choice for you over Collins here?
I think that the contingent value, or like the median expectation of both of those guys, is fairly comparable. At least it's not equivalent. Jaylen Waddle probably has a slightly lower median expectation as far as season-long production goes, but the contingent upside built in. So what would happen to Nico Collins if Stephon Diggs got hurt versus what would happen to Jaylen Waddle if Tyreek Hill got hurt? We're probably looking at a higher top end in the range of outcomes for a guy like Jaylen Waddle.
What about here's a fun one for wide receiver. The rookie Ladd McConkey for the Chargers, who could be the number one receiver there for all we know, because obviously Keenan Allen is now a Chicago Bear. Mike Williams is a New York Jet. What about Ladd McConkey versus a guy who was the number one receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs last year, but they've added Xavier Worthy. He's obviously in some legal issues, is Rashee Rice. If you had the opportunity at that 7-8 turn, Ladd McConkey and Rashee Rice are staring you in the face. Which one are you going to go with more often than not between those two?
Rashee Rice at high frequency.
Rice is a guy that crushed it last year. Are you of the opinion that the Xavier Worthy thing is only going to make Rice better and that the potential suspension for Rice is passed on? Or is it the case of McConkey being a rookie and Joshua Palmer still being there, that maybe he's not the guy in Los Angeles? A lot of stuff to unpack here.
Yeah, it's a weekly range of outcomes discussion for me. And I expect Ladd McConkey's role in Los Angeles to be fairly similar to what we saw last year with Rashee Rice in Kansas City. So, I mean, Rashee Rice was the extreme. I mean, his ADOT was pushing 4. So short to intermediate type guy, volume type guy. But again, when we're looking at weekly range of outcomes, we expect with the new coaching staff in Los Angeles to be run heavy or run biased, at least run neutral. And then where it really matters is they're probably going to have a fairly significant boost to their red zone rush rate, which when they get into the money area on the field, scoring touchdowns, we're probably going to see them running the football at a high frequency. That is the exact polar opposite of what we expect from the Kansas City Chiefs. And oh, by the way, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown stretching the field in the vertical, opening up that area where Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce are going to be operating underneath the safeties, behind the linebackers, first 15 yards from the line of scrimmage. They're going to meet, or we expect them to meet, significantly less resistance in that area of the field with the additions. I mean, Xavier Worthy, obviously the fastest man to ever test at the combine, 4.21. And Hollywood Brown, no slouch, runs a 4.32. So these are fast dudes. They're going to have to, teams playing the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have to adjust the way that their safeties, the depth of their safeties, the way that they roll coverage, the way that they're covering the middle of the field, all that's going to have to change. So I expect big things from the Chiefs. I want to be buying as many of them as I can.
And the Rice suspension is not happening this year, in your opinion?
It's baked in. Even if it does happen, say he misses 2 to 4 games, you're still getting a guy that has an immense a solid weekly range of outcomes with a much greater ceiling than a guy like Ladd McConkey.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And for sure, and I think I'm probably with you on that too. If you're getting a baked-in suspension where I don't think it's happening this year, then yeah, you need to be striking while the iron's hot there. Mike Williams, we just mentioned him, no longer in Los Angeles. He's in New York. He is going at the 12:01. Khalil Shakir, popular breakout pick at the 12:02 this year with the Buffalo Bills, given that Stephon Diggs is not there anymore. They're back-to-back. Wide receiver 53, wide receiver 54. Who would you rather have this year?
I love this range, and I'll throw in a third in Brandon Cooks, who's kind of in that range, and maybe throw in a fourth in Jacoby Myers, who's in that range as well.
Mm.
I'm mixing all those guys, and I'm not. I honestly, I think my ownership on all four of those guys is relatively flat because I'm mixing and matching them. A lot of people, I think, get lost in the sauce with Mike Williams. Oh, he's injury prone. He can't stay on the field. He also has finished in the top 24 wide receivers in fantasy points per game in each of the last 3 seasons. So there's very clearly upside there when he's on the field. We don't know if he's going to start the season on PUP. We don't know if he's going to have enough time to gel it up with Aaron Rodgers, who notoriously is a big trust guy at quarterback. But all that's kind of baked into like a 11, 12th round ADP where it's like we can take a chance on a guy who has proven to produce when he's on the field. So I like all those guys. I'm mixing them in kind of equal frequency.
And that makes perfect sense. If you're a volume drafter, you don't want to focus in like it. And I asked the question, like, well, which do you like better? Well, the fact is, there's not anybody that stands out. So you're trying to sprinkle in a lot of value with all four of those guys that you had mentioned there. I want to shift to tight end here. Mark, when we look at the top of the board here in the FFPC best ball tournament, we see Sam Laporta at the 202. We see Travis Kelce at the 203. Really, really difficult to get both of these guys this year. If you can only pick one for 2024 in best ball, who is it going to be, Laporta or Kelce?
Yeah, this is probably the toughest one up to this point. My answer is I'm mixing them in at equal frequency. But if you like gun to head, you got to pick one. I think it's Laporta. Obviously, the career trajectory, the career arc, they're at very different points along that arc. Travis Kelce being an aging tight end, but he's also a guy who has put up 92 or more catches in 6 consecutive seasons. So I think it's too early to cry wolf and cry uncle on Travis Kelce, but Sam Laporta is he's a different cat, man. That dude's a dog. So I'd have to go with Laporta.
Let's skip a little bit further down the tight ends right now and get into Kincaid and Andrews. I've talked with a lot of high stakes players over the last couple of months. It seems like all of them, I always ask them who's one player that you really want to get in your rosters this year. A lot of them are saying Dalton Kincaid, even though the fact that he is going at the 210 in the FFPC best ball tournament. I've seen a lot of people talk about Mark Andrews and how he's being undervalued. And again, he's not going that much later after Kincaid. It's basically 2 picks. They're both late second round picks. At this point, Kincaid or Andrews here, which one are you more likely to draft for 2024?
Andrews at a very high frequency.
Oh, and I think the thing with Kincaid is there is an unknown mystery box because we saw what he did towards the end of last season. We know that Diggs is not there anymore. Andrews, we've seen this happen, right? Like, and this, I know the Ravens have been pumping up Rashad Bateman a little bit, and some fantasy owners have been pumping him up in drafts a little bit. So, for those of the viewers and quite frankly me, who are surprised to say it's a high frequency of Andrews over Kincaid, I'm curious to hear the analysis on this.
So Dalton Kincaid is a guy that we expect to be one of the primary targets in Buffalo. He's on a top offense. We know that his red zone usage was not on par with some of these other top tight ends that are going off the board last year, but we also know that can grow. So it's that like the famous Family Guy meme where it's like, who knows what Dalton Kincaid can be? He could even be Mark Andrews. Like, what's in the box? I got to know. Mm-hmm. Mark Andrews is a guy that is being depressed right now that has very little changes compared to last offseason on his team that is being depressed because of injury. To me, that's much easier to buy into than all of the uncertainty that has to go right for a guy like Dalton Kincaid. He has to lead the team in receiving. He has to be increase his red zone usage. The team has to go into protect Josh Allen mode and throw the football near the goal line. Because they don't trust the running backs, obviously, and they drafted one to potentially be that guy. So there's just so many different things that have to line up and go exactly right for Dalton Kincaid to pay off where he's being drafted. Whereas Mark Andrews, it's like, we need him to be healthy.
Right. And that's a great point too, because even if Flowers has a big season, Andrews is going to be a beneficiary of Lamar Jackson this year as well. Speaking of Lamar Jackson, let's end on this. You have the opportunity to draft either Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. These guys are separated by about a half round between Jackson and Mahomes. You can only pick one. Mark, who's it going to be?
In best ball at high frequency, I'm taking Patrick Mahomes for all of the single week range of outcomes that we talked about. The magic number of 40 touchdowns, the fact that we know that touchdown is the highest predictor of fantasy production at the quarterback position. Like in a season long, I got to set my roster league, I'm taking Lamar Jackson at great frequency. But in best ball, I want the access to the potential 1.01 or top performer at the position and with a greater top end to his weekly range of outcomes.
The top performer at his position is definitely Mark Garcia at High-Low FF on the X. You can check out his work at fantasypoints.com, rotoworld.com, rotounderworld.com with Player Profiler, and of course, 1 week season as well. Did I miss anything, Mark, that I want to make sure everybody has every avenue to access everything you're producing right now?
Yeah, that's it, man. And I post most everything to Twitter, so follow me there if you want to get access to all that stuff.
It is always great chopping it up with you. Thank you so much tonight, Mark. This was so educational for me. I hope everybody watching became better best ball players. And of course, better tuned in on all the players they're drafting this season. Be good. We will talk again soon. Thank you so much for hopping on tonight.
Thanks for having me, Balky. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's Mark Garcia, ladies and gentlemen, at High-Low FF on the X. I want to thank him and our producer, Matt Deutsch. Check out myffpc.com, your home for the Empire Dynasty Leagues, Dynasty Startups, the FFPC Main Event, the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, and the FFPC Superflex Best Ball Tournament as well. We will not have a show next Thursday. We did the early show with Sean Siegel from RotoViz on Monday, so hopefully that tides you over. I am not going to be available for a video stream with good enough internet to video stream next week, so we will return the following Thursday, and I believe I have to check on this. I'll actually, because I want to tease everybody with it right now. I know I have my guest booked for July 11th, which would be the weekend or the week after the 4th of July. July 11th will be the Fantasy Football Expo guru from Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Bob Lung will co-host the show with me for 2 full hours. Check out myffpc.com. For Mark Garcia, for our producer, Matt Deutsch, I'm Eric Balkman, wishing you a very happy 4th of July. Be good, everybody, and thanks for watching.